All right, today we're jumping into one of the biggest debates happening in human genetics. We're going to explore three competing theories that are all trying to answer a really fundamental question. What actually determines your risk for complex diseases?
You know, it's a puzzle that has been on scientists' minds for over a century. You might know that a certain condition runs in your family, but it never seems to follow a simple, clear-cut pattern. So what's going on? Well, it turns out the answer is not about finding one single bad gene. The reality is, your risk is wrapped up in thousands of tiny genetic variations, and each one has just a minuscule effect on its own. But how they all team up to influence your health, well, that's the huge scientific debate we're going to get into today.
Okay, so here's our roadmap. We'll start with the puzzle itself. Then we'll break down the three big models. That's the polygenic, the omnigenic, and the stratagenic. After that, we'll see how they stack up against each other, and, most importantly, why this debate is so critical for the future of medicine.
So let's set the stage. For the longest time, we thought about genetic diseases in very simple terms. One faulty gene causes one specific problem. But for most of the common diseases we see today, the picture is so much more complicated than that.
Now, the idea that countless tiny genetic effects add up isn't exactly new. It was actually proposed way back in 1918. But we didn't have the tools to prove it until the 2000s with things like genome-wide association studies, or GWAS. That's when we could finally confirm it. And now, with all this data, we know thousands of variants are involved, which has led to these new models that are challenging the classic view and sparking the very debate we're talking about.
First up, we have the reigning champion, the polygenetic model. This is really the bedrock theory, the one that has dominated genetic research for decades.
The idea here is actually pretty simple. Your genetic risk is basically a final score, and you get that score by just adding up the tiny effects from thousands of different genetic variants spread all across your DNA.
A really great way to think about this is to imagine every single one of your genetic variants casting a tiny vote, either for or against a disease. The polygenic model doesn't really care which specific variants are voting, it only cares about the final tally.
So the really crucial takeaway here is that this model is built on a few key assumptions, that there are tons of variants, their effects are small, and you just add them up, and the environment is a totally separate factor. It's all about getting that one single risk score at the end of the day.
But in 2017, a new challenger stepped into the ring with a very different idea. So let's move on to the omnigenic model and see how it builds on and really challenges that classic view. This model says that basically any gene that's active in the right cells can influence a disease. But, and this is key, it says they're not all created equal. It proposes a hierarchy. You've got a few core genes with a direct impact, and then this huge network of peripheral genes that only have an effect because they influence those core genes. This slide gives us the perfect analogy, a corporate hierarchy. You have a handful of CEO or core genes making the big decisions that directly affect the company's fate, in this case, the disease. Then you have thousands of employee genes whose work only matters because it all funnels up and influences what those CEOs do. And now for our third and final theory, the stratagenic model. This one introduces another layer of structure, suggesting that genetic risk isn't just one big pile, but is actually organized into different categories.
So the stratagenic model proposes that your genetic risk is split across different biological pathways. And critically, it says the environment isn't just some separate thing floating around. It can directly interact with and influence these specific pathways. The highway analogy makes this super clear. Think of a disease as a city. There are multiple highways leading to it. Your genetics might make one highway a little bumpy, or maybe another one is a bit narrow. But an environmental factor, like a snowstorm, could cause a massive traffic jam specifically on one of those highways, dramatically increasing your risk through that one single route. And here's a perfect real-world example. You might have genes in a pathway related to nicotine receptors, which gives you a slight predisposition to lung cancer. But that specific risk pathway gets massively amplified by an environmental factor, smoking. In this case, the gene and the environment are working together on the exact same biological road. So we have three really compelling theories: a simple sum, a corporate hierarchy, and a network of highways. How do they actually stack up against each other? Okay, let's break this down side by side. When you look at structure, the polygenic model is just one big pool of genes. The omnigenic model is a hierarchy of core and peripheral genes. and the stratagenic model is a set of multiple, distinct pathways. And here's a really key difference: the role of the environment. In the first two models, it's considered independent. But in the stratagenic model, the environment can directly interact with those genetic pathways. So, which model is the right one? Well, the current thinking is that there might not be one single winner. The genetic architecture of a disease like schizophrenia might be best explained by one model, while something like heart disease might be better explained by another.
Now, this might seem like a pretty abstract academic debate, but the outcome has profound real-world consequences for your health and for the entire future of medicine. Whichever model proves to be the most accurate for a given disease is going to fundamentally shape how we approach it. It's going to guide research, it's going to change how we develop drugs, and ultimately, it's going to make personalized medicine a reality. And you can see how this plays out in drug development. If the polygenic model is right, you might look for drugs like metformin that affect a whole system. If the omnigenic model is true, you'd want to zero in on those powerful core genes, like we do with some cholesterol drugs. And if the stratagenic model holds, you could target specific pathways, which gives you more options if one drug target doesn't work.
As the researchers themselves put it, figuring this out is not just an academic exercise. It could have, and I'm quoting here, broad and substantial ramifications for biomedicine. The answer to this debate is going to truly change medicine as we know it.
And that leaves us with a final, fascinating question to think about. Is your genetic health a simple sum of parts, a complex hierarchy of command and control, or is it a series of biological highways where your genes and your life choices are constantly interacting? The answer is still being written. Thanks for watching.